Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're, as always, super stoked to be here with you, chatting all things personal development, all things doing the best we can, all things one step at a time.
1000%. One day at a time, one moment at a time, trying to keep a nervous system calm through it all.
Yeah. So, while we go through this journey with you tonight as we talk about this subject, bow to the body, this applies so much to what Alex and I have directly been through in our lives. What the methods and the favorite sort of roadmaps that we're going to share with you tonight are embodied experiences. Like, this isn't stuff we searched on Google and we're like, what can we share tonight? It's like, here's what I've literally found when I'm face planted in the pavement. You like, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's going to be good. I can already feel it coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
So Alex and I have been friends for a while, and my life was kissed by an angel the day she came into my life. Like, just so glad we're friends. Been such a source of love and energy and healing and forgiveness and laughter to the nth degree. So grateful for our friendship to the max. And in addition to that, we've also had the opportunity to do a ton of work together, both on camera, with our lives, especially throughout the pandemic, but also we've been involved with some public speaking together and sort of different events that we've spoken together at or co-hosted or what have you. So we've done a ton of work together in the same sort of lane as what we're doing tonight. And I just couldn't be more pumped to just have you as a friend and have you as a companion for tonight. And I'd love for you, in your words, to share who you are and what you do and all the amazingness that is Alex Grant.
Oh, you're the best. So first of all, I'm just honored to be part of the Janey Brown show at any moment. I love being here. And we can talk for days and days about everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a privilege to just be here working with you in any capacity, really. So a little bit about me. I am Alex. My name is Alex, and I am currently a mindfulness coach. And I formerly was an athlete for about 18 years, went into marketing for another almost decade, and was public speaking and coaching, kind of like in between all of that. And so that's kind of how I've ended up where I am. And as Janey said, we met 3 years ago and became fast friends after a really fun flight together. Here we are.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it was clearly destiny. Just crashed into each other's lives 100%. And didn't realize we were so high off the ground until we were high off the ground. So this subject tonight, thanks for obviously thanks for sharing what you do. And you can find Alex on Instagram. You can find her on her website. I'm going to link her particulars in the caption on YouTube so that you can find her. And towards the end of the segment, we will also shout that out and make sure that you can get in touch if you want to. So this the body, bow to the body. This subject is really near and dear to Alex because we've both spent a plethora of time in our lives just overriding our body's needs, and paying for it. And the problem with overriding your body is that you can very quickly end up exhausted, so leading to burnout. You can end up injured, depending on what you're doing, and you can deal with a lot of mental health challenges. So, tonight we're going to try to talk about the solutions to this tendency of ours as human beings to override our bodies. And we're gonna, share our favorite methods to really tune into the body, listen to its wisdom, so that we can prevent that burnout and so that we can live, more empowered lives. As always, feel free to chime in. Feel free to ask questions, offer insights, and say here, so that we can see you, because we can't see who's online until the conversation gets going in the chat. So definitely chime in whenever you are feeling inspired. To start things off tonight, I want to review, a little bit about exhaustion. I just want to talk about that for a second and offer some ideas that I had around that. And then hopefully that will inspire a fire conversation between all of us in how we can do better at bowing to our bodies. So exhaustion or burnout can happen physically, emotionally, and mentally, obviously, depending on what you do. I feel like when the body's had enough, it's pretty straightforward. Like if you don't stop, your body will stop you. It kind of comes down to that, either through sickness or through strain, right? So like it's almost in a sense easier to stop what we're doing when we're physically exhausted, because we kind of don't have a choice. Like if the body is injured enough, let's say, we will not be able to proceed forward in whatever we're doing physically. So if you're an athlete, for example, and you are pushing beyond your physical limits, your body's going to stop you and you're physically not going to be able to continue. Same with if you come down with like an illness, whether it just be like the flu or another type of disease, just from kind of overriding your body's needs. Either way, physically, when we become exhausted, burnt out, our body kind of stops us for us. But where that doesn't happen is when we become emotionally and mentally exhausted, or let's say where that may not happen as often. So it may be harder to detect what our limits are physically, rather from an emotional and mental standpoint, because we can kind of get away with overriding mental exhaustion or overriding emotional exhaustion. Not to say that won't lead to physical, problems, but that's, it's almost like we can get away with it for longer, let's say. So when we're exhausted, at least this is what I notice for myself. So I'm going to just review a little cycle that happens and offer a perspective on, what we should do about that cycle. And then Alex and I definitely going to get into some strategies. So when I'm exhausted, my tendency, instead of just to be like, oh, I'm exhausted or burnt out, my tendency is to be like, well, instead of find out why I'm exhausted and like stop what I'm doing that's causing the exhaustion, my tendency is to go, well, I just shouldn't be. And then find examples as to why I shouldn't be exhausted. So the first sort of like, I guess, step in the cycle when exhausted and burnt out is to go, well, let me compare myself to when I did more than I'm doing now and was still energized. So like me last year doing the same amount of work or maybe more wasn't exhausted, so therefore I shouldn't be exhausted. Or let me compare myself to someone else. Well, they're doing more than I'm doing and they're not exhausted seemingly, so why should I be exhausted? So the first step is this comparison when and if I even notice I'm exhausted. The second step is self-judgment, which I've kind of already said. It's like, well, I just shouldn't feel this way, or I should have more energy. And so it's like the comparison paired with the self-judgment then leads to force. That's the third step in the cycle. So it's like they're doing more than I am and they're not exhausted, or I have done more in my life and haven't been exhausted. Therefore, I shouldn't be exhausted. Therefore, I'm going to force myself to keep going. And I want to say that sometimes force is necessary. Like when we're, there is something to be said about sometimes we're just unmotivated and we need a push. That's different than when we're genuinely on empty. Right? Or if we're afraid, sometimes we just need a push. We need to force ourselves to go up to the stranger and introduce ourselves or jump on stage or whatever it is, right? Like you kind of have to push yourself in certain circumstances, but that has nothing to do with pushing yourself when you're already on empty. So this cycle of feeling exhausted, judging ourselves for it, and deciding to force ourselves to keep going, I believe just creates more exhaustion. Like, instead of just saying, oh, I'm exhausted, let me rest, right? And so, I actually wonder, this is like a theory that I'm pondering. I wonder if exhaustion isn't a result of us doing too much at any given time. Like, I don't know that it's necessarily a byproduct of us doing too much at any given moment, but more a byproduct of us willing to override ourselves when we actually need rest. Because think about it. There have been times in everyone's life, probably all of you can think of an example where you've done a ton, been super energized, and felt like you could go forever. And then other times where you've done barely anything and felt like you just climbed Mount Everest, right? So I don't know that exhaustion is actually a result of how much we do, but rather how much we are overriding ourselves when really we need rest. And so I say that, and I'll leave that so that Alex can chime in on, I guess, how to know the difference and how to tune in with our bodies so that we can start to listen to when we need rest, listen to when we don't need to force ourselves, so that we can prevent this vicious cycle of exhaustion, and like re-energize ourselves. So thoughts?
I like literally have like 5 like different bullet point notes on like things that I could just totally go off on right now. But
Well, I'm pumped to hear all of them.
So I have so many me toos to what you said in terms of just the judgment. What I wrote down here is making myself wrong. Like, there were so many times, especially in my athletic career, that I made myself wrong for feeling like I needed more rest, because like you, I was looking at all of the reasons as to why I shouldn't be tired, instead of looking at the other like, or the other
Right.
pie and everything else that's going on, and not only in
Right.
terms of what I'm doing, but also my mental load. I think I was very unaware at that time of how I was talking to myself and how critical I was, and how much energy that was also going out. So
Yeah.
I've talked a lot before about the energy inputs and the energy outputs. And I think I was really unaware of how much of an output I had in comparison to an input. Like you said, like when you were saying, it's not necessarily about how much you do and in comparison as to when, but more so, like for me, when I think now, the work that I'm doing puts energy back into my tank. The movement that I do puts energy back into my tank. Whereas the movement I did before, especially when I was in gymnastics, loved gymnastics, and I owe a great deal of it to where I am today. However, because I was pushing myself when I was already on E, it led to here we go. The thing that interrupts my nervous system every time. But because I was pushing myself on E for so long, it led to injury, it led to more stress. It was just never helpful. And I feel like in the environment that I was in, both in my athletic world and also actually in my marketing career, it wasn't accepted to, when you're emotionally or mentally exhausted, you can kind of see a bit of a fatigue, but when there's nothing actually wrong with you, it's like, but you can still sit down at your computer and like get this production schedule done, or like make these calls or arrange whatever and do all these things. Or like, yeah, you're tired, but in sports, it's like, well, all of us are tired, and like we all find a way to dig deeper all the time.
Right.
And one of the things my coach used to say to me is like, well, can you do another one? And as I got older into my collegiate career, the question wasn't, can I do another rep, but should I do another rep? Like, is this helpful for my overall practice and for the well-being of not only myself and the team, but for but is it harmful? Like, is the potential for injury higher? Like, there's just all these other things that go along with it. So I think, oh my God, this is like a huge long tangent, but I think that for one, I've, making myself wrong and all this, the condemning, Having more self-awareness into energy inputs and outputs has been extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just acknowledging that society, I guess maybe is getting better about acknowledging mental health and
Yeah.
emotional exhaustion. And it's also
Mhm.
really important that, I'll speak in I's, that I take a stand for the way that I feel and believe my body when those signals come up so that I can advocate for myself.
Mhm.
And I'll leave that there.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's a lot of a lot of points there that were totally right on. I mean, I always love when you offer the reminder of like, don't make yourself wrong. Like we do that. You know what I mean? Like we question what we're feeling. It's like we can say we shouldn't feel exhausted all the livelong day, but the fact is that we are. You know what I mean? Like it's like saying like I my arm shouldn't be broken, but it is. So are you going to do
Yeah.
push-ups on it? You know what I mean? Like so I love the don't make yourself wrong. Like fact is fact. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're exhausted, that's a fact. And so kind of the only way to like move through that fact and change that fact about you, like this objective truth about you, is to accept it and then apply, whatever the methods are that are needed to kind of get through that exhaustion, like rest, and we can get into that. The other thing that I love that you brought up, which is a really helpful strategy in preventing burnout and like going back to listening to the body's wisdom, is can I versus should I? Like, can I do another rep? Yes, I can.
Right.
Can I stay awake for 48 hours? Yeah, technically I can do that, right? Like, can Marcus Luttrell drag himself through a desert with one arm and a piece of his tongue? Like, yes, he can, and he did.
Yeah,
Like,
you totally did.
just to 10x that, right? It's like we can
Yeah.
do amazing things, right?
Mhm.
But should we? And the should we is directly predicated on how dire of a situation we're in pertaining to our own survival. It's like Marcus Luttrell dragged himself through a desert because he's a Navy SEAL, and if he didn't do that, he would have died not trying. And he wouldn't have been able to live with himself or die with himself that way. So his code of honor and his code was, I will die trying. And then he survived, which is incredible. Survived to tell the story. But like that's a man who's about to die, right? Like you deciding to force yourself to get up at 5 a.m. when you went to bed at 2 a.m. it's just not smart. It's like, can you do that? Yeah, but why? Like what's the motive? Are you doing that because it's the only way to survive? Literally, is it the only way to survive? You know what I mean? Ask yourself that. And if it's not, like, it's not smart. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to help you in the long run as far as I'm concerned. So I like the can I versus should I thing that you just brought up.
Yeah, super helpful. And then the other thing I was going to say actually as you were talking that came up for me is when you say like with the whole make yourself wrong thing, it's like it's a form of gaslighting yourself. Well, I should be happy or I shouldn't be tired. It's like, but you are. Like, the
Right.
truth is that maybe you are tired and like maybe you
Right.
do need to again like to make yourself wrong for that. It's also a really great way to take kind of like start a slow devaluation of yourself within yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like you're almost taking away a sense of self, right? Like you're not trusting what your body is saying.
Yeah, right.
So you're
Totally. Yeah.
saying in that moment, body, I don't trust you because what my mind knows better or
Yeah.
conditioning
Yeah.
knows better. And it's like, that's where like the negating the wisdom of the body, I feel like becomes, very or quite dangerous, is not only because of the physical ramifications and mental health, but also like self-esteem and self-worth comes into it as well when you don't believe in what's coming up for you, or you continue to self-abandon it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, Gabor Mate talks about that a lot, in that we were born with this instinct to rely on our intrinsic wisdom, our intrinsic needs, our gut instinct, if you will. And, either due to trauma or just sort of the tendency kind of for every human to abide by the social constructs, which are an external goal and objective and standard, we like lose our ability to sort of to trust our gut instinct. And not only the ability to trust the gut instinct, but also the ability to even feel it. Like we lose touch with it. And he relates that to authenticity, which is a whole other sort of, wormhole or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
that self-negation is interesting, and it sort of feels like kind of another vicious cycle. Like the more you self-negate and don't trust your gut instinct, the more you tend to or need to look outside of yourself for the answers, and like compare and measure against your a past version of you, or someone else, right? So
Yeah.
it's not a great plan, and we all do it, but it's
Yeah. I feel like you got to
not
do it wrong a couple times. You got to burn yourself out all of the way before you're like, that didn't work out.
right. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. Or
totally.
you get sick or something. And like the other thing too is like, I feel like burnout is talked a lot in work and career, right? Because that's, I find that the majority of the conversations are about work, but then there's you can burn out in anything, even your relationships, in
Yeah.
anxiety, stress and anxiety, like your thoughts, and just bringing yourself to the edge all of the time, maybe by like looping
Hmm.
something over and over, or being pushed to your threshold in a relationship where it's like you're continuing to have to persevere through something. And if the situation doesn't change, but you still have this hope that it can change, it's like, well, you can get burnt out. I feel like that line between like, you know burning out and then being able to be like, okay, like I pushed myself to my threshold, and that's like, okay, now I can recover, versus I'm way past my threshold at this
Yeah.
point, and now I don't even have the energy to advocate for myself. I've lost my sense of self. I'm almost like cynical about life. It's hurting all of my other
Yeah.
relationships, and it's
Yeah.
carrying through to my environment and how I engage and relate to everything. Um, and how do I even get out of this? And how do I begin to get out of this? Because my energy levels are at zero.
Yeah, that's so tough. I really resonate with, and I do want to talk about resentment. I actually had that written down to sort of hash out tonight. It like I would say I still struggle with understanding what my edges are. And not only that, but like I almost am like compulsive about needing to constantly find out what my edges are. Almost to like make sure I'm still resilient or something. Like it's like, oh, like, but if I just added one more thing and was able to do it without like flattening myself, doing a face plant on the pavement, then I would know that I'm capable of that. And that's, I think there's value in that, but I also think there's a real danger of burning yourself out, or finding out I'm not just burnt out, I'm like beyond burnt out. And now it's going to take me like twice as long to kind of get back. So I would say that that's definitely something that I currently still experience. I think that I will say this though, and maybe this is just how it works, but it's like I am better at going, okay, like I'm now starting to feel overwhelmed, or I'm now starting to feel exhausted. I think I can take on a little bit more just to see, but like I can feel my edges near. Whereas potentially before it'd be like there's no edge ever. And like there's no bounds. And not only that, but like an edge isn't even acceptable to think about, kind of thing. So I do think that there, even if we're not perfect at like, preventing, like always being in like perfect equilibrium and like never getting exhausted, like I do think that we can, get better and better at being less exhausted each time we push ourselves too far. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because before coming to this conversation, I was just reflecting on just my own past burnouts and playing with my edges and what they have been and what they are now. And I think back in the day, especially in like my athletic years, my my edge was so far that it was probably not healthy. And then as I've gotten older, I've
For
actually
sure.
like moved my edge back where I'm like, this is a much healthier edge and I know it well. But I also feel like the world and where it's at today has presented a whole new realm of what my edges are that are brand new to me. Like, I've never
Mm,
lived through a pandemic before, so I actually
yeah,
don't know
that's
what
true.
my edges are in this context. I
That's
know
true.
them well in other contexts. So when I think about like edges and my thresholds and when I've gone over them and when I haven't, um, I was thinking like, I feel like I really lean into the wisdom of my body and like really try to tap into that conversation to navigate unknown territories like pandemics, entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
and then the working out piece for me is kind of always this moving thing. Like sometimes I feel like I can lift more weights and I'll go through a phase where I'm back into heavy lifting. And then I get to a point where I'm like, nope, we're going to switch that up a little bit. And again, it's just like tapping in and understanding what's best for me and how I built my relationship with my body this far. But it's
Yeah.
interesting because it's like an ever evolving thing,
Right.
which makes it
Which
tricky.
totally, which speaks to sort of what we were saying before about comparison. Like, as much as we can't compare our, us to our old self or us to others, right? When we're exhausted and claim, well, I was doing more than, why am I so exhausted now when I feel like I'm doing less now? Like, as much as we can't do that when it comes to burnout, we also can't do that to find our edge. Like, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same thing, Frank. It's basically exactly the same thing. I kind of just said the same thing twice, but yeah, it's like kind of goes back to that theory of we can't compare ourselves, um, because it's always different contexts, like you said, and therefore we sort of just have to look at the objective truth of now. And that, I think, inherently, like the presence piece, like grounding yourself in the present moment, is one of, maybe if not the best way to listen to your body's wisdom. Like, if someone's like, well, how do I listen to my body? Like, I don't even know what that means. I think probably a good roadmap to start with is practicing mindfulness and presence and self, which builds self-awareness. Because if there's this tendency to compare yourself to others or yourself to your past self, who it maybe in your mind thought crushed it more than you're crushing it now, um, again, that's irrelevant because you're not in the situation you were once in, and you're not in the situation that others are in. Fact is fact. Objective truth about you is objective truth about you. And the only way that you can deal with that is to be present with that. And so mindfulness is really, really important. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I totally agree. Like when I think about, oh man, the condemning, the condemning still happens. Like, let me just be
Mm-hmm.
radically honest about it. But it's nowhere, right? Like, let me not sound like I've got it figured out.
It's all good, man. I'm right there with you.
um, yeah, the self-condemning happens, but not in the capacity that it did, where it's so much of an energy output that it's adding so much more stress.
Mm,
And one of the reasons for that is because it's almost like I'm mindful about being mindful. Like I'm so aware at this point that sitting with myself just and sitting with myself and doing the best that I can to just sit with myself in human form, like dropping all of the labels of, who I am, whatever, just allowing myself to be fully human and noticing, like, okay, like, how am I actually feeling? And like, that sometimes that is so terrifying. Like, I, when I was in my marketing career and I was feeling burnt out, I was also really burnt out in my relationship. And so it was like this double whammy. And getting still was the most terrifying. Like, I would avoid stillness because stillness, when I would get into that place, I'd be like, neither of these things are working out really well right now. And so that might mean I have to change something. And when I think about changing a career that I worked up to for so many years, or a long-standing relationship that's been existing for so many years, I'm like, well, if I, change these things, I'm in a radically different life. And so as much as I love advocating for people to sit and to be mindful and to tune in and to really get honest about um, how their body is feeling, I can also appreciate that it can be really scary, potentially overwhelming, um, and yeah, it's I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, for sure. Mindfulness, and we've chatted about this before, I'm sure, and I also posted a video on my YouTube channel called The Downside of Mindfulness. It's also on my Instagram, and it's basically about the fact that if you've been traumatized, um, and you try to practice mindfulness when you're having a traumatic flashback, it can actually just compound um, the experience of the trauma. And so, yeah, there are times where, like, literally have said the same thing. Like, there are times where you need to be mindful of being mindful, or I would actually say be mindful when you need to practice mindfulness, because I think that being mindful is always a good idea if you can do it. I certainly can't, but like, if that's achievable, or as often as possible, be mindful. I think that is the, you know, is the path. But to practice mindfulness, because the practice of mindfulness and the act of being mindful are obviously two different things. Practicing mindfulness where you're sitting with yourself and you're experiencing this stillness and this presence, that has to be practiced in a titrated manner. Like, it doesn't do any good for you to force yourself to sit through in stillness an episode of intense sobbing because you're grieving a loss. Like, maybe, like, you've got to be the one to, you know, confirm whether sitting with yourself when you're like in fetal position sobbing and like forcing yourself to be there, you've got to decide if that's helping you or hurting you. I mean, sometimes you also just don't have a choice. It's like you're just a crumpled mess on the floor and you're just there with yourself crying, if you're having a really intense experience. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, let's say in the event of a traumatic flashback, it's like titrate that, like, see if you can sit for one more breath. And then if you can and you feel better, okay, keep going with that. If you don't, maybe you need to get up and change what you're doing for a while and then try again later, or try again another day. But I do think the key is to keep trying, because conscious awareness is, it's like, it is the path to growth. Like, we can grow, I guess, unbeknownst to us in ways that we're not aware of. But conscious awareness allows us to be the drivers of our life rather than the passengers and the reactors of our life. We become the creators versus the people where things happen to us when we have that awareness. So it's a dilemma, because it is hard, like you said. It's hard for me to, it's hard for me too, and I've been doing it a very long time. But it's so there's a dilemma there. Like we have to be respectful to our healing process and our growth. But at the same time, I think we need to be consistent with it, because I do think that the more awareness we have and collectively, like literally, the better the planet's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, like
and
like
I was just gonna say, and I believe that it's the path to listening to the body. Like I don't think you can listen to your body without being present.
agreed. And
You know?
yeah, 100%. I was gonna say, like, to finish that story of like sitting with myself and almost like avoiding with it, that led to a complete loss of self. Like and I didn't have the energy to advocate for myself, which ultimately led to, and I mean, you'll know this, like I was in a dark place for about 3 months and walked away from life
Oh, I
as
see.
I knew it. And that happened to be the thing that worked for me, although I do not suggest waiting that long for I mean, at that point, you know, it wasn't so much of a choice for me. Like it kind of just was like this implosion of all things. But
Yeah,
if I listened to myself earlier, I didn't have to get to that point. So, I mean, I was doing the best I could at that time
totally,
with what I
totally.
had. So,
That's what I
like,
was
yeah,
gonna
I
say. I was
think
like,
I was
wait, wait.
grace.
It's
I give
like
myself grace for it.
I mean, shoot, man, like if like I guess you could say it this way, like if you were capable of practicing mindfulness and you had the exposure of those tools young enough to like then be able to use that as a default by the time you got to that shitstorm in your life, well then yeah, maybe you could have mitigated the prolonged, like maybe you could have ended it sooner and walked away sooner, let's say, like maybe that's true. But again, that's like a completely different movie. You know what I mean? Like that's just
Yeah.
not what happened. Like, you know what I mean? Like you didn't have the exposure to these tools, let's say early enough for like you were already too sort of in the mess, to it's like I always say this, I don't like know if this is going to resonate at all, but like, what with my clients when I'm trying to help them overcome stage fright, it's like who you are on the stage is who you are off the stage. You can't meditate 5 minutes before you go on stage and like that's your key to like being calm on stage. It's like this has to be part of your lifestyle. It has to be something you practice all the time so that you're changing your nervous system so that by the time you get to the 5 minutes before stage, those tools are already embodied and then you can still use it and still help yourself calm down and so on and so forth. But it's kind of a similar situation in your circumstance. It's like the poop was hitting the fan at full speed, and you were then starting to implement a really hard tool in the middle of that. And it's like, so no wonder, it didn't necessarily like work like a charm as it maybe does at times now in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's similar again across the board to like even in a physical sense, like someone who like we exercise now, we deploy these healthy habits now with nutrition and water and proper sleep and proper recovery and, cardiovascular stamina and whatnot, so that if we ever are in a situation where we can't do those things, at least we have enough of a baseline to sustain us through the crisis, right? Rather than being in a crisis either from like a natural disaster or because your health just craps out on you and you have to start from scratch in the middle of a crisis, like that's a whole other ball game. So but I hear you in saying that, you're saying like me being unable to sit with myself and build the awareness that I needed in the crisis caused the crisis to be prolonged, but it's also like not your fault and you couldn't have done anything differently.
Yeah, yeah, and informed me of how important a daily practice is.
Right. Right.
Right.
Totally.
Um, so yeah, no, so thank you for all of that. And I didn't mean to make that like a whole like thing, but more so, yeah, just say like that. I love when you said that the repetition of not just trying to implement it like 5 minutes before you get on the stage or like when things are
Mhm.
already happening, but like how even like 5 minutes a day can compile and be helpful,
Totally.
is definitely something that I
Yeah.
carry with me now. Yeah, for sure. Big lesson.
Me too. Yeah, it's about habit building. You know, I do try to, I do try to sit there for at least an hour every morning. I sometimes only make it to 30 minutes and sometimes 5, to your point. But the key is that I'm doing it. Like the key is that I'm building the habit of sitting, of sitting in the chair, practicing mindfulness or practicing prayer or practicing breath or whatever it is. Right? It's just I'm in the chair. This is my time to connect to a higher version of myself, or like just gratitude or whatever it is, right? Like that is so important. Um and even like today was actually one of those experiences. Like I got up and I just went on Instagram. Like I just didn't do what I usually do, which is put on the meditation music and meditate. And I was on Instagram dicking around or whatever, and I'm like, no, this is not going to be the way that I start my day. And I got off, and then I was like, all right, I feel like I've wasted a bunch of time. It's too late in the morning now for me to go through a full hour. I've just been sitting here for too long and my body just isn't, it's not here for it anymore. Let me do a 10-minute gratitude, you know, meditation or whatever. Let me listen to someone else talk about gratitude or whatever. And at very least, like maybe my whole being wasn't like bestowed in some aura of like abundance after that 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, but like it was a good reminder of, oh yeah, this is something that, this is a frequency or a vibration that I can tap into. And that's helpful, because it's easy to forget that. It's easy for us to focus on our problems rather than focus on what's going right, or focus on the stress or the overwhelm or how far behind we are on what, like, crypto, like, whatever.
Totally. That whole saying, well, like when people talk about like, do like start your day with one thing a day that's for you. Like it sounds so just like, yeah, I know this, but
Right.
it really just makes such a big difference. And
Yeah.
it's actually like something that I really enjoy like playing with a little bit. Like sometimes it's a seated meditation, sometimes I'm listening to something. Um, Sometimes it's like movement or a stretch. Sometimes it's a walk. And again, it's like I tap in and I, pick what feels good for me. And I mean, I love that you wake up and you meditate. Like you're good with that.
Otherwise, it's
Um,
not happening, dude. Let me just be clear.
right.
I'm not like so like driven, just like it's like I'm not doing it if I don't do it that way. Period.
Yeah, and it's really good. Like in the morning, my brain is just so much, it's easier to drop in from there
Yeah.
as well. I know morning is a great time to just kind of
Although I
get
will
something.
say, like
Hmm.
the 3 p.m. zone, it's like there are days where I'm like, yeah, I could really like kill two birds with one stone and like meditate slash napitate. You know what I mean?
I love that. Napitate. So
I didn't come
good.
up with that. I think my mom or someone in like some meditation circle or whatever came up with that. But yeah,
Love
it's,
it.
like you can, it's a great excuse. Like it's 3 p.m. or 2 p.m., whatever that's called, the lull or whatever that hits. Like that's a great
Hmm.
time to go meditate, man. Like use that hour or 30 minutes or whatever to like clear, like to revive yourself by meditating. Then I haven't been hitting those lulls lately, but sometimes I do, and it's like, yeah, it's a great little
It's amazing if
excuse.
you're
Yeah.
not hitting a lull. That's great.
um, so, okay, I have a few other thoughts here that can contribute to
Hmm.
the conversation and bound to the body. Um, One thing that actually is just something that's interesting that I found out about recently, and this is more on the brain fog side of things. So, if we're talking about how, um, you know, the tendency to be burnt out and exhausted, let's say, can be prolonged longer when it's an emotional or mental experience because our body physically will shut us down if we're physically pushing it too hard. Um, so I came across this idea. I don't know. Have you ever heard of directed attention versus, sorry, I have to remind myself of the phrase, directed attention versus where is it? Oh, involuntary direction. Have you heard
I
of those
feel like
terms?
I have. I have. I feel like we've talked about them in the past, maybe? Or no?
I haven't,
Anyways, doesn't matter.
simply because I just came across this in one of my textbooks, and I've never heard. I mean, it's kind of logical when you hear it, but it was very profound for me. I was like, oh, I really need to think about this more. So this is an interesting way to patrol mental exhaustion and prevent brain fog, which is sort of like a mental burnout, or it can be a manifest, that can be a presentation of mental burnout or whatever. So directed attention is maybe what you're thinking is like deep work versus surface work. That's different than this, but maybe you're not thinking that, but that's a whole other, sort of topic or whatever. But anyway, directed attention is it's this forced attention. So it's like when you're studying or on a phone call with a client. I'd even argue that this live is somewhat of a directed attention. I think that, well, before I go into whether it is or isn't, I'll tell you what involuntary attention is. So directed attention is like you have to like hone your mind. You have to like put the reins on and like kind of drive your mental focus in a forced and controlled way. Whereas involuntary attention is something that is just this implicitly intriguing thing that's grabbing your attention. So like music or watching a television show or listening to the birds or watching the birds. Like it's just this, I don't have to try even 1% to be attentive to this thing. And there is something actually called directed attention fatigue. And it's this, the science behind it is, I'll read a little quote that I pulled from the textbook. It's a neurological symptom that occurs when the inhibitory attention system, the part of the brain which allows you to concentrate in the face of distractions, becomes fatigued. So there's a part of our brain that controls whether we are distracted or not, and it takes a lot of energy. And this is why attention deficit disorder is a real thing. Joe Rogan. He actually, thank God, he actually had I actually don't remember if she's like a clinical psychologist or what she was, but they talked about ADD and she kind of cleared that up with him because he was like, this isn't a real thing. And it really is. Whether people abuse the term or not, that's a whole other conversation, but it's definitely a thing. Either way, this component of our brain that allows us to control our attention without distracted is it can be very exhausting, especially for people with ADD, and it can exhaust you and burn you out, and you can get brain fog as a result. And so the whole point of bringing this up is to bring attention to the fact that there are these two modalities of mental application, and being aware of that can help you understand like, oh, if you're like, why is my focus like messed up, or why am I running out of energy right now? Well, how much directed attention have you forced yourself to do today? And how much involuntary attention have you allowed yourself to do today?
I love that. I love it when you paint a picture of a scale for me, and then I get to like measure like where am I at, and like how far imbalanced have I been.
It's
That's
a
great.
game
It's a great way to
changer.
simplify it. Oh, for sure. For sure. It's like energy inputs, energy outputs. Like if I
Yeah.
put down a list of paper
Yeah.
and I look, I'm like, how many things are draining my energy and how many things are giving me energy? Sometimes
Yeah.
that list is very imbalanced. So I like, I love a binary anything because it's simple. Is it helpful? Is it harmful? Is this helping my immunity? Is it hurting my immunity? Is this
Yeah, right.
giving me
Totally.
energy, taking away energy? It just makes it so simple to help navigate what can feel like what can be challenging to navigate, right? Like even, I think a lot of people struggle with, well, how do I tune into my body? What does
Yeah.
that mean? And then taking the time to build a relationship with
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
It's like it's a journey. Like it is a journey.
It is. It
So,
is.
mhm.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
So I was gonna say, I think that it's really tough for some people, and it's like, well, like listen to your body, and it's like, I feel like that phrase can just go and out, because
Exactly.
it's like it's said so much, but perhaps there isn't a concrete understanding of what that means for you
Mhm.
if there hasn't been a regular practice of it, or like attempts made on a
Right.
regular basis of continuing to build a connection.
Right. And like it, as you said, it's a journey, and there's no, I always say this, basically about anything though, this can apply, but it's like, there's, there's no one size fits all answer. Like, our optimal well-being, physically, emotionally, mentally, it requires a multi-pronged, malleable approach. What it looks like for you, it looks different for your friend. What it looks like for you looks different than it did yesterday. Like, there's just a million different ways you can build, as you said, this relationship with your body and with yourself. And I think today we've described a bunch of different sort of, I guess, like loopholes, or not loopholes, but sort of different ways of thinking about it. Like, I guess by now it's obvious that building a relationship with your body can happen through exercise and through hiking. It can happen through meditation and mindfulness, and we went into that a bit tonight because it's relevant and important. Um, it can happen through music. It can happen through paying caution to what you eat and how you prepare your food and how you plate your food, right? But the things that we talked about tonight, you know, the it's like easy to miss, right? That we have the tendency to make ourselves wrong when we, for example, feel burnt out. Like, we have the tendency to counter argue that and come up with reasons why we shouldn't feel exhausted, rather than accepting that we are exhausted and then going from there, right? We talked about, the difference between, can I push myself more versus should I push myself more? Like, that right there can help someone not only connect to their body more and have a relationship with their body more, and learn to bow to it. But also, yeah, you know, just make smarter decisions, which I think goes hand in hand. Like, bowing to your body and making smarter decisions
Yeah.
they go hand in hand. So yeah, like, just these nuanced sort of ways to build relationships with our bodies has been interesting about this conversation, because it's not just sort of the regular, like, exercise and get lots of water, which you should also do, right? It's like, really, do inventory on your mind and how you're talking to yourself, and the patterns of how you treat yourself. um,
Mhm.
I want to review a few more things when it comes to uh, bowing to the body, but I want to let you go first if you have anything to say about what I just said.
I had something come up, but I don't want to. I'm afraid that if I say it, it's going to take us on a journey.
You can say it. I'd
Okay.
rather go on your journey.
Okay. Well, all I was thinking is like when I was thinking back as to like the burnout points or almost burnout points that I've faced. One of the most common feelings that I've had was like feeling good is not this. Like
Mm,
that was like one of like the easiest body signals for me to acknowledge is like what I know is feeling good is not this. And when it's
right.
not that for an extended period of time, that's when I know I'm getting into trippy waters where it's like this could not go well, and I've got to use all of my tools. I've got to start using my voice. I've got to look at my options. That's kind of where I go to is that feeling of like it's not how much longer can I do this. When those questions start to come up, that's when it's like bang bang bang, like that's almost like it's getting to be a bit urgent now. um and the other thing I was going to say is if I've had if I'm going through a little bit of a time, sometimes just turning on music and shaking my body
Yeah.
out gets that that energy release and
Yeah.
at least allows me to get into a grounded place where then I can sit with myself. Sometimes I need the energy release first, and then I can sit with my and be present with myself in stillness. So if I have a lot of
Yeah, that's
blah to get
big.
out, I'm like
Mm,
blah, like get it all out,
yeah.
shake, music, favorite song, get all the energy out, and then I'm like, okay, and it actually prepares my
Yeah.
body for the still moment where the other stuff can come up a bit more clearly.
Yeah,
I'm done.
that's a really, really powerful and beautiful approach. Um, I think I will say I think that there's benefits to doing it any which way, right? Like at the end of the day, one method that I used to teach when I was teaching yoga was I would tell people when I first entered the room, before you change anything about your breath, just tune in. Because I wanted them to pay attention to where they were at coming out of the world. Like, rather than let's breathe and then be mindful. It's like, well, yeah, you're probably going to feel better after you breathe and be mindful. And same, like, you're going to feel more connected. But so I'll finish my sentence. You're going to feel more connected and grounded when you move and shake and then are mindful. But that's not negative either. So it's just to say, like, there's all different types of ways to practice mindfulness. Practicing mindfulness, like in the middle of what you're doing, can be useful because it can show you who you are and what you feel and where your system is at neurologically, physically, emotionally, in the middle of your day while you're doing you and in your personality and like going balls to the walls. But practicing mindfulness after you shake and move shows you what it feels like to feel good. And then you have sort of like a goalpost to live up to. And then compare how you felt when you were in the middle of your day being a badass CEO or whatever, potentially stressed out, potentially feeling not enough, whatever. Compare that to how you felt after you worked out and then were mindful, and then maybe try to see if you can bridge the gap between the two. But certainly, like shaking it off and allowing your body to move in a non like commander way, like in a non-drill sergeant way, like just let your body move. Who cares what it looks like? Don't worry about following instructions, just move. That alone can provide such a deep sense of connection with your body and its needs, and can that alone can literally be the path to bowing to your body. And I've experienced that with you, like here, having our dance parties. Just, oh, this is what it feels like to follow what my body wants rather than exercising according to code, or like according to what the instructor's saying, or according to like what I think I should be doing to like build stamina and strength and muscles and abs and whatever, right? It's like, oh, this is what it feels like to move according to my body's wisdom. And like that practice alone can transfer into, okay, now let me listen to my body's wisdom when I'm in court, or when I'm in the office, or when I'm with my client, or when I'm with my children,
1,000%. Yeah.
This is a
Okay,
big
so
thing
two
you brought
things.
up.
Oh,
Yeah, please.
I was gonna say two things. I love what you said about oh my God, I just went somewhere. Okay, let me come back. It just went somewhere. Okay.
That's
Then
okay.
the second thing was about connecting with yourself, like in court or like wherever you may
Mm-hmm.
be. It's like that in and of itself. It's such a journey to get to that place in your body, because it's like in order to get there, you have to push that to its limits. Like I think what was just in my own experience of like, shaking my body and moving in a way that it wants to, is letting go of any expectation of it looking
Yes.
cool
Yes.
or
Yes.
looking a certain way. Like it looks weird AF,
Yeah,
look
man.
like crazy people. And at the same time, when I'm in that place, and luckily when we do it together, I feel safe to be witnessed by you, which
Yeah.
is also just its own practice.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but letting that, like that judgment go, so that you can start building like you almost have to push it to its edge to be like, okay, let's like actually get into conversation here, because change doesn't happen without any kind of discomfort. So it's like, get uncomfortable and just, if your body was moving for the very first time, how would it move?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
like
don't
if
know, you know what I mean?
with
Like, play, have fun with that,
totally
explore.
like no preconceived notions, no one around. What would it like if you just like let your body move, just like one finger at a time, one shoulder, like one element at a time, what would move first? Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, it
totally.
just, what would you do? Like, what would you instinctively do? Especially when there's music too,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, for sure. And like, what a way to just be fully present. Like, that's such a quick um, access point to get down into the
Time,
body.
big time.
The other thing that came back was when you were talking about um, I love when you said when people would come into your class that you would just say, like, without doing anything, just check in and see how your breathing
Mm,
works, because it's a point of comparison with yourself.
yep, big
Like,
time.
not with anything on the outside, but it's like you can measure based on how you feel. And I think, like, for me, that's where my wisdom has come in, is when I make different references of different points of my
Yeah,
life, of how
yeah.
I've felt. So I just feel like that's such a rich piece of wisdom there, is literally like, before you do anything, get present with that first,
Yeah.
journey, and then see where you're at the end and what the changes are. I think that's great.
100%, totally, man, totally. Yeah, I mean, and it's relevant because we are multifaceted. Like our lives are multifaceted. We have different experiences, and like we don't just have the experiences of being on the mat or being in the meditation chair or being in the gym, right? It's like if we only practice mindfulness in those spaces, then yes, it may I believe it will transfer into other areas of our life, but I think that we can be more prepared if we're continuously practicing mindfulness, or rather continuously attempting to be mindful, because again, a mindfulness practice is different than the application of being mindful itself. um, I also had a thing I wanted to say that went in and out. This happens to me all the time. In just maybe it's a sign that I need to be more of a vessel rather than use my logic so much. Um, but
I mean, sometimes it just flows, hey? Anyway, we'll see if it comes back.
yeah, totally. I'm sure it will. But yeah, um, I, and I think it also, I mean, it does directly relate to my trifecta philosophy, which is that in order to change anything, you need to be aware, right? Like, how can you willingly change something if you're not aware? You just can't change what you can't see. And so it's like, okay, check in. Then you really can't adjust it unless you've accepted what you found, right? Like we can be aware of what we found and then deny it, or be aware of what we've found and reject it. Like, we have to accept it to then go, okay, this is true. Like, this is objective fact, right? Like, instead of, oh, I'm exhausted, but I shouldn't be. It's, oh, I'm exhausted. Okay, how do I accept that. I embrace that. How do I work with that? How do I then adjust, which is the third A. And that's when we can get into the practice of meditation or breathing or movement. But going back to your point, like sometimes just to dive into movement can be helpful, especially if you're doing it in a manner where you're going to take care of your body's needs. Like, especially if you can do it in a manner where you're like, I'm going to listen to my body first as I do this movement. Where I think it's not helpful is if you dive into movement and you're not mindful at all, because then you can just get injured or whatever. So it's like, I think you and I are able to get such benefit of movement first, then mindfulness, to listen to body wisdom, because we're going into that shake practice sort of mindfully anyway. Because
Yeah,
we know how to
totally.
listen
That's
to,
a
you know what I
fair
mean?
statement. Yeah, totally. And it's like, it's becoming a more comfortable path for me to take at this point.
Yeah,
Just
totally.
shake with reckless abandon. Um, no, totally. And such good points there. Like, going in with self-judgment is just not helpful. I love like
Yeah.
embrace it, like and just let it be there, let it inform the next without making it wrong. And
Yeah.
gosh, like that's a freaking rep count right there to, work on. And I know for myself, the judgment can come in, and it's always a practice of like, I believe when my body tells me things now because I've burnt myself out enough times to have learned the lesson that now when it comes up, I'm like, okay, I'm not
Yeah.
arguing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
man,
not
totally. I
arguing.
mean, that's this whole conversation is so important because if we don't listen to our body and essentially bow to it, we're just we're going to hurt ourselves. We're either going to get exhausted and then we won't be able to continue, or get injured and then we won't be able to continue, or get sick, or have mental health challenges. Like no matter what, it always comes back to, what does the body need? What does your body need? And of course your mind and your emotional structure is part of your body. It's part of your nervous system. So the goal is to balance the nervous system, and the only way to balance the nervous system is to really understand the condition that it's in, and that means that you have to listen to the wisdom of your body so that you can deploy the methods necessary to balance the nervous system. I'm glad you brought up judgment again, because it kind of brings it full circle to what I was saying at the beginning of this conversation. And it's kind of what I want to close with, or potentially close with, depending on where this goes. But, as I was saying at the very beginning, judgment around burnout or judgment around whatever it is that we're feeling, I feel tends to perpetuate the thing you don't want to feel. Like if you're judging yourself for feeling burnt out, you're likely not going to rest. You're likely going to push yourself because you think you shouldn't feel burnt out. Same with if you're feeling afraid, or same with if you're feeling resentful. And resentment is just this last little piece that I wanted to add. When we don't listen to our body, even if later we see, clearly, because in hindsight we often do see clearly, what can happen is that we have resentment for ourselves. So judgment, rather than listening to the body and following its lead, can then later lead to self-resentment for the past, right? Like resentment is about something that happened in the past. Self-judgment is, whatever, present or past. But, that's going to require a lot of self-forgiveness, obviously, and self-forgiveness, from my perspective, is literally just acceptance of the past self. So we've talked about, we need to be able to accept ourselves. We need to be able to accept the objective reality that we're experiencing in order to listen to the body's wisdom. Like without acceptance, we're rejecting the body's wisdom, right? Just like without presence, we're not actually in tune with what the body's wisdom is. Without acceptance, we're not actually embracing what we're finding out within that presence. So acceptance and presence go hand in hand. And when we can forgive ourselves, that's essentially just acceptance of our past self. And, the person that we said should have known better, or should have done better, or only if, or, whatever all the excuses are. There's some parable, it's famous, and I can't remember who said it, but they said, it might have been the Dalai Lama, but they said something like, resentment is like swallowing poison and expecting someone else to die. That's true for someone else. It's also true for yourself. Like, not only are you swallowing poison and expecting, you're like swallowing poison and expecting you to die, and you're swallowing poison. Like, that just sucks, all of it. So nothing is cool about self-resentment, and yet it happens. So releasing resentment and via self-forgiveness is really important. And I also will add that burnout and exhaustion and not listening to the body's wisdom, that can also come by way of us holding on to too much baggage for other people. And I'll say resentment is different than anger. Anger can be quite healthy, especially if it's expressed appropriately, or dealt with appropriately, let's say. And I'll also say that resentment is sometimes a defense mechanism and a self-protection mechanism that's necessary for survival. And we talked about survival at the beginning of this conversation as well, and how relevant that is to overriding our body's needs, right? Like sometimes we have to override our body's needs to survive. So there are times where resentment is necessary to survive, and that's usually when you're in a situation where you're in danger, obviously, and there's no way to put up boundaries with the person that's causing you the resentment. But when the boundaries are up and you are no longer in the situation where that other person is causing resentment, it's very important that we work to let that go. Like resentment is a sickness, and it will only hurt us and prevent us from being in touch with ourselves. Like it's a defense mechanism. Like, I mean, it literally is. And so if you're walled up with resentment, you are potentially not going to have the same amount of access to your body's wisdom, or maybe but your body's wisdom is going to say you're full of resentment and this is toxic. So I just wanted to say that piece about resentment because it's tied closely to self-judgment, which we talked about earlier. And these are elements that we need to work to remove in order to get that connection with self. And when we and ironically, like when we don't have connection with self, it just leads to more resentment and more judgment, which then leads to less connection with self. So I wanted to say that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And there's a comment as well that Carrie Fisher says, "This is so true. Love you, Janey B." Love you too, Carrie. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts as we come to a close.
I honestly, I think you summed that up really beautifully. And I think we talk a lot about those things in terms of relationships with other people and don't often look at the repercussions of resenting ourselves and how that what it can manifest internally, and then the self-forgiveness process and journey of trying to heal that. So I think that you said it beautifully. I think you made a lot of great points, and all I have to say is this.
Yay! Thank you so much for this conversation. Honestly, you included and offered so many great nuggets, and again, just different perspectives of how to connect to the body, put the body first, what will happen if you don't, how you can talk to yourself and find that out from a mental standpoint and from a physical standpoint. It's all so relevant and was very interesting. So thanks for showing up as always.
Thank you. I love you.
I love you too.
Show. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a really good night. And as always, before we go, where can people find you? Your website and Instagram. Let's say that because I know those are the main hubs.
Yes. Instagram is where I hang out the most. My handle is at alexgrant.xo, and my website is www.alexgrant.ca.
Awesome. And Alex has some great courses that she hosts and also does one-on-one coaching and also hosts her own workshops here and there. They're sign up only right now. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Give her a follow so that you can be in touch with what she's doing and see all her awesome content. And also I also have a website. I'll post all that in the captions below. But most of the people on here probably know the drill. I'm the founder of Fierce Academy, and I also have an online program that's evergreen. You can check that out on my website. You'll see it in the caption below. And I also do one-on-one coaching and all kinds of other fun things. So enjoy checking us both out, and hopefully we get to see you in the future and work with you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.